people who are on this all week will get sick of me saying I'm always scared the first minute or so when we wait for the attendees to start showing up. But we are getting ones through, which is good. As with yesterday, if anyone was on the session yesterday, we'll just wait for 2 minutes at the start just for the attendees all to get in. You're going to see new faces on most of these this week. Nikki, who is on with me today, we're doing an introduction at the start. I'm not sure if everyone was in the sessions yesterday, so I'll make sure I do an introduction as well, and I'll turn off my phone as my father tries calling me. Nikki, how you doing, mate?
I'm good. I'm excited for this. How are you?
I'm good. I was telling you earlier about the screaming babies in the other room today, so hopefully we can get through the day. I was sent to a couple of people that attended yesterday and reached out to me on LinkedIn that when we got through to multi-threading yesterday, she started screaming, which very much put me off. So I'm hoping that we can survive the evening without that.
You've got the screaming baby. I've got the screaming puppy, who I've just put in her crate. But I've been on calls today where she's just decided it's time to start screaming as loud as possible.
Okay, fine.
I've decided she should go to bed right now.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to have both animals and babies probably make an appearance in this. Then that's a good start. Also, for the same reason as I'm not sure how many people were on the session yesterday that are in this today, I'll do a bit of an introduction about who hackajob are as well, just so that that's probably gives us a little bit more context to our credibility and where we get a lot of this data from. Give it 1 more minute and then we'll start. Cool, let's get going. So today's session will be going through front end, specifically looking at the relationship between different languages, so touching on HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Nikki will be taking us through TypeScript and then React and React components a little bit later. Same as yesterday, so we won't be utilizing the vocal Q&A functionality. If you've got questions, please do put them into the Q&A section. There's also a chat functionality. If you want to use chat and discuss things among yourselves, the one to use is all attendees. If you want to send something directly to me and Nikki, use panelists and we'll answer everything from there. I think this session will probably take 30 to 35 minutes. So there's going to be lots of times for Q&A, so please do get them all through. As a way of introduction to myself for anyone that wasn't around yesterday, so my name's Darren. I head up our new business team here at hackajob. I've been with the business for just under 6 years, and the team I kind of work within is I'm building out the functionality in the US, which we launched out in May. All of the data we'll be going through today will be taken from our own systems. So hackajob as a business, we have a marketplace which is built for engineers across software engineering, data science, test, architecture, etc. So all areas of tech, and all of this data is held by ourselves. So if you've got any questions on it, feel free to send it across. If we can't answer any of the questions on this call today, we'll make sure we follow up afterwards like I did last time with everyone else. Nikki, do you want to do an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet everybody. Thank you for joining. So I'm Nikki. I started at hackajob last April, so 2021, in our customer success team. So I work closely with our customers as they're using the platform to ensure that they're seeing success. I'm working with them on the roles that they have, the candidates they have in process, and some other elements. Prior to joining hackajob, I'd been in recruitment for around 9 years, predominantly focused on digital and data recruitment, recruiting into a variety of businesses with a core focus at the latter stages of my career, or recruitment career within digital agencies.
Awesome. So from an agenda perspective today, if I can get him to move through to the next one. So overview of front-end development, then we'll do an introduction to JavaScript and then go through some of the frameworks testing in Node. And then at the end, we'll touch on some of the React and React components before finally ending with some insights and then the Q&A. So what is a front-end developer? So I gave in the analogy yesterday on back-end. The back-end is very much the brain of an application. So front-end is very much the look and feel of an application. So it's what you see, what you interact with when you're going onto a website. So it links into the world of design, and you might hear it talked about as the client side, whereas the backend is often spoke about as the server side. So when you're going on to, for example, Amazon, everything you're seeing in interaction with, all the buttons, all the banners that are coming across, that is all built on the front end. So there's a couple of different types of front-end developers. As you go further down these, it becomes probably more common nowadays. So predominantly, to start with, probably 10, 15 years ago, anyone that's as old as me and Nikki will remember the days of dial-up, and whenever a parent or a grandparent went onto the internet, you were kicked off, and at that point everything was very static. So there was single page or multi-page applications that were built mainly in HTML and CSS. Anyone that's used MySpace before will be very common or very aware of those type of languages, because they're all built in that. So anything you were doing on that side almost was a little bit of mini coding. So to start with, you've got very design focused front-end developers who are utilizing HTML, CSS, and more of a design background. So commonly now you see HTML5 and CSS3. There's also web-focused modern software engineers. So these are the guys and gals that are more focused on stuff like JavaScript, TypeScript, and utilizing frameworks, which we'll go through a little bit later. And then you get very computer science focused algorithmic type engineers. So we're seeing this more commonly now because universities are focusing more on languages that are around the front end and node side, predominantly computer science. When you look at how it was taught educationally, was very focused on the back end, but we're seeing more predominantly now that it's either focused on a full stack, or there is elements in it that will be front-end focused. I've got a friend that's going through a boot camp, and I've got one that's going through university at the moment and retraining, and both of those are focusing more on the JavaScript piece. So key technologies. So HTML is very much the structure of the web page. Like I say, HTML5 is predominantly what we see, and anyone that knows Game of Thrones will see here, this is probably what we're looking at. So HTML, if you just have a HTML page, very ugly, not great functionality. And then the CSS is the look and the feel of the page. So we're looking at Bootstrap, we're looking at Sass, and we're looking at less there. That starts to make the page look more presentable. And then when you get to JavaScript and TypeScript, that's what the interactions are. And for some reason, the way we're presenting this is taking all of the spaces out. So that should read the interactions on web page, and then React, Angular, and Vue. I will touch on that in a second, but React, Angular, and Vue are all frameworks of JavaScript. So because JavaScript is a front-end version in some ways of technologies like a Python, there's a lot more frameworks on that than there would be in other areas. So what is JavaScript? The analogy I gave yesterday is that JavaScript and Java are about as related as pill and pillow. So it's often abbreviated to JS. It's the most commonly used language in the world, and that's because of the fact that nowadays you see it used in both back-end and front-end. So anytime you're building an application with front-end element, which is basically every application, you're going to have an element of JS, even if it's TypeScript. That's written in JavaScript. So it's the most commonly used language in the world. It's an object-oriented programming language, which means that for a lot of developers, it's an area that you can move into quite quickly. And that's why we're seeing a lot of developers go from a PHP to a Node nowadays, because there's similarities to it. You don't often see candidates go from like a Ruby to a JavaScript. So you'll often see them come from similar languages. It's designed to make web development easier and more attractive. So all of these websites that you're interacting on a day-to-day basis, whether it's a Bloomberg, whether it's a Daily Mail, whether it's a Fox News, whatever you're going on to, the reason that it's attractive and it's easy to click through buttons is because of JavaScript. And it drives client-side web behaviors. So the interactions don't rely on the back end nowadays for you to function and go to the next areas. So frameworks. So these are the most common frameworks that we'll see. So there you're looking at React, you're looking at Vue, you're looking at Angular, and then Next.js. Nikki will touch on this a little bit later, but from a commonality perspective, React is very much the framework of choice within the developer sector right now. We see Vue is kind of up and coming. Angular, when I first started, specifically on Angular.js, was very much neck and neck with React, but over time we've seen that drop off significantly. So it's becoming more and more tough both to hire a React developer, but if you are using a different framework, which you might see as advantageous because it means you're not competing against so many people. If you are using Angular, it's going to be very, very tough to get a candidate to go from React into an Angular. And also, if I'm an Angular developer, unless I am very passionate about it as a framework, I'm probably going to try moving into React because it's a framework which is much more in demand. So therefore, the salary I can command is significantly higher. We're seeing Next, I keep saying not.js, Next.js become much more common. As with anything, the scale-up businesses are the ones that are driving this. Generally, what you see in the marketplace is those companies that are the unicorns of the world will start using the new languages, and then over time it will move into enterprise businesses as well. And the reason often for that is there's a lot less red tape and things preventing you from moving to different languages and different frameworks. Whereas if you are someone of the size of maybe an eBay or someone of the size of Fox, it's very, very tough to do because there's a lot of code that's written and utilizing these frameworks, so you need to change it a lot more. Whereas if I'm a scale-up business, there's not that legacy of code in there. JavaScript testing. So as with everything, there's testing frameworks, which we'll touch on the different ones in a minute. They use a lot of unit testing. So unit testing, essentially, for anyone that wasn't part of the last couple of sessions, is looking at breaking code down into many different units. So the more that you can break it into units, the easier it is to find bugs. As I touched on yesterday, predominantly in the past, you had waterfall methodologies, which basically meant that you went the whole way through that waterfall, so the whole way through that coding process, and then at the end you would get to your testing. The problem with that is that you could get 2 weeks into a sprint and then find out you've got a huge bug in your code, and then you have to troll through 2 weeks worth of code in order to work it out. So agile methodologies is now changing that, and also companies are moving more towards unit testing. So when you're looking at engineers, I would always be asking about unit testing. If they haven't been involved in unit testing, they're probably not as modern a software engineer as a lot of companies probably are looking for now. You then move on to TDD, which is looking at developing the test before you get to the logic. So what I mean by that is you're essentially develop your tests ahead of time, and then when you're coding, those tests will already be telling you what's wrong. So you're not waiting to test afterwards and then saying, hey, I've wasted an hour on this and then the test fails. You already have the test developed so that you are learning as you go. And you've got BDD, which essentially is a collaboration between both tech and non-tech. So what we're looking at here is ensuring that the projects meet with the business needs. So not just looking at, does this work from a tech perspective? So a lot of engineers will think about it is, does this function, does it work? It does. But if I'm using this, I'm a non-techie, does this function in the way that I would expect it to? And if it doesn't, as a user, then it's failed in the BDD process. From a testing framework perspective, the easiest way always, I think, to remember the JavaScript ones is JavaScript have made it quite easy for us. A lot of them tend to be in and around the areas of hot drinks. So in there you've got mocha, you've got jasmine, and you've got chai. So that's always how I think about JavaScript frameworks. And different frameworks have different functionality. So some of them are used for TDD, some of them use BDD, some of them are used for Node, some of them are used more for the front end piece. So that's why there's different frameworks. Whereas if you look at Java, for example, you mainly use JUnit. C# you mainly use NUnit. Because JavaScript is such a flexible language and used in a lot of different ways, you have different types of frameworks depending on what you're trying to achieve in there. And then Nikki, I believe you're taking over here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so TypeScript. So TypeScript is an open source programming language. It compiles into JavaScript. So What's interesting is that any code that's wrote in TypeScript is also valid, that's wrote in JavaScript, sorry, is valid as TypeScript as well. It is a superset of JavaScript. It's quickly becoming one of the most popular languages. It's used by software developers, and we started to see that trend over time. So what you would find a few years ago is a lot of developers not wanting to use TypeScript. And as you can see from our lovely meme over here, people slowly starting to adopt TypeScript and really enjoying it. Could you jump to the next slide, please? Thank you. So then we've got Node.js. Now, a lot of people commonly think that Node is a backend language. It's actually not. It's a runtime environment that allows you to code in front and backend with JavaScript. It's often used for real-time applications, so things like chat, newsfeed, and web applications. So think about social media apps or WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. These types of applications are using Node with JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly. Like the one I always think about is WhatsApp, and I also think about Slack. So every time you're getting a Slack message that pushes it through and says this has happened, that is essentially because of Node. So it's really commonly used in a lot of those web applications that are then pushing stuff through.
Awesome. Cool. Then you've got React.js, so React JavaScript. It's an open source JavaScript library. It's used for building user interfaces specifically for single page applications. It's used for handling the view layer for web and mobile apps, and also allows us to recreate reusable UI components. React is the most popular framework. So if you look over here on the right, you can see the comparables against Angular, Ember, React, Vue, and Backbone, and you can see that React has the highest adoption rate. This does change depending on what region you're looking at. So if you look at mainline Europe, you'll see Vue having slightly higher market share. We did used to see, as Darren touched on before, Angular having about neck and neck with React. Yet over the last 3 or 4 years, React has really overtaken.
And then what I'd probably add on top of that is that if you look at Angular is sometimes a little bit complex because of the fact that you've got Angular.js and you've got Angular. Angular.js is written in JavaScript, whereas Angular is written in TypeScript. This image on the right-hand side is actually, apologies, I designed this presentation. I didn't explain exactly what this was to Nikki, but these are searches through Reddit and GitHub in these time periods. So this is looking at how often are developers asking questions around that. And anyone that is involved heavily in tech recruitment will know that developers are an intriguing bunch, and they make sure that if they don't know something, they'll go search for it online. So they'll go ask questions on a lot of these different forums. And React, as you can see, is miles ahead. There's certain times where it dips slightly in certain months and weeks, but the reality is it is about 4 or 5 times more utilized on these areas than the other ones are.
Awesome, thank you. Then you've got React components. So you've got React Admin, React Blueprint, and React Virtualized. React Admin is a library that's suitable for building B2B applications on top of REST and GraphQL and APIs, and it's customizable by design. You've then got Blueprint, which is React component that allows you to build desktop applications primarily, and these components are suitable for building complex data-dense interfaces. So think about things like Tableau dashboards or ClickView as an example. Then you've got React Virtualized, which helps to build front end that's data heavy. It can be used to include numerous components for efficiently rendering large lists, tables, and grids. And then the next slide, please. Awesome. Then you've got React Native, which is an open source JavaScript framework. It allows you to build across multiple platforms. So you can build across iOS, Android, and web. So once you learn JavaScript, if you're using React Native, you can then build across pretty much anywhere. So it's like learn once and then write anywhere. It uses the very same code base as React, and it brings all of its glory to mobile app development.
Yeah, and we'll be touching on this next Monday when we go through the emerging tech and mobile. But React Native is a hybrid language, and there's advantages and disadvantages to it being a hybrid language. So when I say hybrid language, what I essentially mean is it can be used across different operating systems, so Linux or Android. So if you look at the advantages and disadvantages, which I'll quickly touch on now. So advantages is very much that you can build out a team that can develop applications for different operating systems. So from a cost effectiveness perspective, it means that you can build out a cheaper team, which obviously a massive plus. But the disadvantage to it is the applications don't run as quickly as they would if you built it in native languages. So for iOS, you might build it in Swift. If you're going to do it in Android, you might build it in Kotlin, which are more of the native languages. And the reason that you might want to do that is that it runs a lot quicker. Yeah, that's probably the main reason for those.
Awesome. Then you've got React Native and mobile. So you've got Onsen UI, which is a hybrid mobile app UI framework. It works with Angular, React Vue, Meteor, and pure JavaScript. It allows to use HTML5 to create hybrid mobile apps based on PhoneGap in Cordova. And developers can then create mobile apps using web technologies like CSS, HTML5, and JavaScript. Then you've got React Native, which we just touched on. So it enables you to build world-class application experiences on native platforms using a consistent developer experience based on JavaScript and React. And it's focused on allowing developers to efficiently use platforms that they care about. So like I said before, you learn once, you can then write anywhere. Facebook uses React Native in multiple production apps, and they'll continue investing quite heavily in there as well.
And I think the final thing I would say on this is that from a pure JavaScript perspective, the other way you might hear that called is vanilla JavaScript. And essentially vanilla JavaScript is JavaScript written without any framework. So if you ever see the word vanilla and then language, that's essentially what it means. It means that you're using the pure language and not using frameworks. There's a lot of companies out there that will say that they want people to be able to write in vanilla, because it means that you aren't relying on the frameworks, and therefore if they are to change framework, it doesn't mean you're starting from absolute zero. JavaScript, probably more than any other language, is very, very framework heavy, and that's why it becomes more and more important to know the right frameworks, i.e. why candidates want to be utilizing React, because it's the most utilized one in the world at the moment.
Nice. Yeah, then you've got types of applications. So there's 3 types. You've got web, desktop, and mobile. Web application, just as you would expect, it's something that lives within a web browser. So just think of any type of website that you go onto. You've got desktop application. So it's something that lives specifically within your desktop as a standalone application. So if you download Zoom or if you download Slack and you're not using that on a web browser, that would be a desktop application. And then mobile applications, which will run on a mobile device, such as a watch, a tablet, or a phone.
Yeah, and the advantages to a desktop application in particular is you're not reliant on the web being up and running. So I know that if you look at a lot of the G Suite stuff, that a lot of that is in the web. So it means that, and Nikki probably has experienced this because we are a G Suite house. If the internet goes down, or if G Suite goes down, you basically can't do anything on there. Whereas if it's a desktop application, that lives within your desktop. Therefore, you can still edit stuff without really worrying about what else is going on elsewhere.
Nice. Never fun when you lose access to your emails. Then you've got the most in-demand skills. So there's different stacks. You've got the MERN stack and the mean stack. So the MERN stack is Mongo, Express, React, and Node. And then the mean stack is Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. So the difference there is the framework. You've then got Node.js overall, and then Vanilla.js, as Daz just touched on. And then there's some alternative frameworks to React that you can try, which is Angular, Vue, Next, and Ember. And we're starting to see Next pick up a bit more popularity.
Yeah, we'll be touching on Mongo in particular in that session on Monday as well, which is one of the non-relational databases. Cool. So similar to the other sessions we've run this week, so when we look on our system about recruiter insights, so about 10.8% of front-end talent is in New York, 7.3% is in San Francisco. So front-end development is one of the rare ones where San Francisco isn't the area where you see most of the talent. And then 6.6% of the talent is based in Dallas, 5.8% in LA, and then 4.6% of the talent is based in DC. When we're looking at where there is good supply, but not necessarily as much roles, so there's less competition in these marketplaces. Philadelphia is a very, very good place to be finding talent. Chicago and Boston. So depending on how your company is set up, if you're set up in a hybrid model where people can go into the office maybe once a quarter, these are good locations to be getting people from. As you then get out to the West Coast, then it becomes much more expensive. So if you are a company based out in San Francisco, maybe start looking at if you can work remotely. The East Coast, appreciate from a time zone perspective, not always ideal, but it'll probably mean that you have more options and more cheap options. These are the companies that are most actively hiring. And when I say most actively hiring, what I'm talking about here is these are the companies that have the most active roles right now. This is the one data point which isn't taken from the hackajob system. This is taken from the wider web. So right now, JP Morgan, Cognizant, AWS, and Kruger tend to be the ones alongside Target and Safeway that are the ones that are most actively hiring at the moment. You would usually see people like Google and Apple on these lists, but as everyone is probably aware, they've started slowing down their hiring in the last kind of quarter or so. So it's meant that there's a few more companies that have picked up the slack there. The other actually thing that I would touch on, and advice that we always give at hackajob to clients, is that when you are going through a recession, as the US is about to go through and the UK and Europe is going through right now, it's always a fairly good time to hire if you can, because of the fact that there are less companies that are hiring in this marketplace. So it's less competitive out there for talent. Generally, as you can see here, there's 9-to-1 jobs to engineers in this marketplace right now. And the challenge with that is that this is the marketplace when we're going for a recession, not everyone's hiring. Imagine how much that jumps up as soon as we move to the point where everyone is back in hiring. The one caveat I would always give, and something that I had a company say to me a couple of years ago and has always stuck with me, they said, we don't need to offer candidates as much now from a salary perspective because there's less companies out there looking to hire. That is the worst model for me. I think that you're just setting yourself up to fail there. As everyone that is a tech recruiter on this call is probably aware, generally you see candidates move between every 17 to 21 months, which means that if you are setting them up to fail and they know that they're being undervalued, they're not going to stay with you long term. They might come to you because options are limited at this moment in time, but all they're going to do is take the knowledge that you give them, and they're going to move somewhere else, and you're going to lose all that talent. So there's 33K front-end engineers in the US, and when I say 33K front-end engineers, what I'm talking about there is these are purely front-end engineers. These aren't engineers that are full stack and utilizing backend languages as well. These are purely front end. There's 6.9 live vacancies in the marketplace at the moment, and there's 800 engineers that are actively looking in the US. So there's not a huge amount if you compare it to other areas, and we'll touch on other ones in a later one. And that is the end of the session from a perspective of information. I've seen there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. Please do get as many in as you want. We've got about another half an hour left. If the session runs short, we can absolutely run it short, but we're going to be around for the next half an hour if people want to ask questions. So question one, I'm going to chuck this at you, Nikki, and then I can elaborate as well. But which JavaScript framework is used the most?
Yeah, no, awesome. So React is the most widely used front end framework. You do see a difference depending on which region you're looking at. So that's looking at holistically the overall market. But in mainland Europe, for example, you'll see Vue having some market share. We can see Next.js also starting to gain some traction. Overall, and like we said before, actually, Angular used to be super popular, just as popular as React, yet they hadn't been making as many updates as React had over the years. So React started to overtake them.
And I think what you said just then is exactly what I was about to say. I touched on this yesterday, but I think the more that a language or a framework evolves, the more likely it is to stick around in the long term. So it's going to be really interesting in the next couple of years what happens with React, because it's built up ahead of Steam across any other framework right now. But as you often see in oligopolies and duopolies in a marketplace, the less competition you have, the more you start resting on your laurels. So it's going to be interesting with Next coming in and us seeing it coming in a big way, whether React is still the silverback gorilla in the room in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. Why do we need different frameworks for JavaScript? It's mainly what are you looking to achieve from it. It's the same reason why you might use different languages. It depends on exactly what you're trying to do. Each language will have different components. It will have, every framework will have different components, and it will have different functions within it. So it's very much what you're looking to achieve. But React, because it's been around for a while now, it has a lot more built into its libraries. Anything you'd add there, Nikki?
No, I think that makes sense.
How do I choose a JavaScript framework? It basically is the answer to that last one that I kind of touched on. It depends on what you're looking to achieve there. Obviously, it wouldn't be people like myself or Nikki choosing the frameworks that you're going to be utilizing. It's probably coming from a hiring manager or an engineering manager. But when you're speaking to them about why a candidate might be right or a candidate might be wrong, I will always be challenging them. So if a candidate maybe knows Angular but doesn't know React right now, how long do they think it will take a candidate to get up to speed with React or Angular? It's a very, very competitive market, as you can see on this, and this is why I've left the slide up. So if you aren't, if you're not willing to look at candidates that maybe know a different framework, and maybe it'll take them 3 months to get up to speed, it might take you 3 to 4 months to find the right engineer that knows React anyway. So always, when you're speaking to your hiring manager, challenge them on the reasons why they would look at one framework only. When you get to staff engineers, it becomes a little bit harder because these can be either leading teams or leading projects. But generally, I think it's always worth looking at someone that has the acumen rather than a finished article. As I touched on yesterday, finished articles don't tend to stick around too long because they know everything that they can learn from you. So always look at someone that maybe doesn't know everything, because they're going to be very grateful for everything you've given them. Nick, I'll let you touch on this one first, and then I'll elaborate. Are tech tests still relevant in today's marketplace?
Yeah, I think they are. I think it depends how you run them. I think there's a variety of ways to do so. So the options are, or the ways that companies can run tech tests. Firstly, you could do a take-home test where you'll send the candidate a test to complete in their own time. You could do a paired programming test or a live coding test, which is a session where they'll be with someone from the team working with them on a problem. So there's multiple ways that you can look at testing a candidate's skills. I do think that it's important to do this so you can understand what level they're at and where their strengths are, where their challenges may be if you were to bring them into the team. Yeah, I do think that I personally lean closer towards not sending take-home tech tests and doing something that's a bit more interactive where they're able to work with the team, because for the candidate, that also gives them an experience to see what it would be like working in that business and interacting with a hiring manager or somebody from that engineering team.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of those points there. I think that the problem with tech tests a lot of the time is it's not a fair recommendation. It's not a representation of what they'd be doing on a day-to-day basis. So anyone that's connected to me on LinkedIn would have seen something that I put yesterday. But it's looking at tech tests often are absolute hell. So it's the hardest thing they're going to do. And then they walk into the role and it's a lot easier. So tech tests often are setting candidates up to some extent to fail. So what are you looking to achieve from your tech tests? Are you looking to get the top 10% of candidates to come through? Or are you trying to get rid of the bottom 20% of candidates that would never do well in your role? I would always go with the latter, because there might be some candidates that don't know everything, but would be an incredible candidate to bring into the business. I also think the problem with take-home tests is, Nikki will be aware of who I'm talking about here, but we work with a couple of clients that have tech tests that are upwards of about 4 hours. And the problem with that is that if you are an organization that have a 4-hour test and I'm an engineer, why would I choose to do your test when a lot of companies are offering half an hour to 45 minutes to an hour tests? In 4 hours, I can do 4 different tests, and that means that I've got 4 different eggs that I've got in the basket. So if you're going to do a tech test, make sure that it's efficient and it's relevant to what the candidate's doing, and also make sure that it's relatively short. So look at that, getting rid of that 20% by doing some basic questions, but don't make it so complex that you're going to take candidates out of that process. The final thing I'd probably touch on before we move on, I was in Seattle for an event a few months ago, and I sat down with some recruiters from some of the businesses out there. And one of the things that someone said to me was, we don't often get feedback about why candidates are failing tech tests from the hiring managers. So it's very hard for us to define to a candidate and give good feedback. And I think, to be honest, if a hiring manager isn't feeding back to you on why candidates are failing, it's hard for me to say to you about your company, but I would say that I'm not going to work on your roles until you do so, because I think it becomes very, very hard. And the problem with not being able to give candidates good feedback on a tech test is they put multiple hours oftentimes into doing your tech test. Therefore, there's a butterfly effect that comes off the back of that they'll say to their friends, their colleagues, their family, this is what happened at X business when I sent through a tech test. I don't know why I failed. And there will then be a butterfly effect where they'll start talking badly about you, which means there's ripples in the marketplace. And as you'll see on that number at the start of this slide, relatively, there's not a huge amount of front-end developers out there, so you have to treat them very, very well. Cool. Anything you'd add on top of that, Nikki? Hopefully that sums up.
I think that covers everything. I think something that I see quite often, just touching on a point you made, is that a take-home tech test that's takes 2-3 hours to complete, it just becomes a blocker to getting candidates into process, right? So I think that if you are send something that's a take-home test, just keep it super concise. Give candidates a set amount of time to complete it, and then ensure that they're getting that feedback quite rapidly as well.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of companies that are taking tech tests out of their process at the moment. So there's a lot of companies we're working with that have gone down to a 2-stage process. So first stage is either a hiring manager or a recruiter screen, and the second stage is a final face-to-face. It's scary often to move to that, but there is a reason that there is probation put into a lot of people's contracts, because although you don't want to make the mistake by hiring someone that's wrong for the business, if you miss out on a candidate, that can be as destructive to you. Like, what is the knock-on effect if you don't bring someone into the business in a timely manner? The best companies we work with that hire generally will get someone through the process in between 11 and about 21 days. The average time to hire on a platform like hackajob is 17 days. Therefore, if you're doing a tech test and it's going to take candidates a week to do it, you've basically missed the entire process that they're going through with everyone else. So the quicker you can make the process, the better. Nikki, for tech positions, how would you evaluate junior, intermediate, and senior seniority levels?
Okay, so this is quite a big question, so I'm not sure how much time that we have. I think that there's really two things that you're looking at when you're evaluating seniority. I think the first thing and the most obvious thing that people look at is just years of experience. I think the more important thing to look at is what have they done during those years of experience, right? So when you're looking at a candidate, firstly, you want to understand what has their responsibilities been on projects, how much have they had ownership of, when it comes to development, were they in charge of leading a stream on the project? Did they build something versus just maintain something? I think there's just a lot more to it. And also, you tend to find that some people just have a better grasp of development. Two people may have the exact same amount of years of experience in quite a similar background, yet someone may be a stronger developer, right? So I think you need to look at their skill set, their understanding, as well as what they've been doing within that time. And for that reason, you sometimes see somebody who looks fairly junior in terms of years of experience, but actually is qualified for a more senior role based on what they've been doing.
Yeah, and I think this is a bigger problem in the US than it probably is in other parts of the world. Like, since we've opened up in the US is probably what I've seen, that more recruiters are very stringent on years of experience. And I find that tough to understand at times, that someone needs 10 years of experience. I think when someone gets past a certain level, like if someone has been using Java for 3 years, what difference are they going to really get to if they've used it for 6 years? I think that often it becomes a number. It's like, what have they done with Java? Like, that's the more important thing. It's not how many years of experience they've got. It's what have they done with it. One of my favorite stories of placements we've done is actually a project engineer. So he was a mechanical engineer, and he wanted to get into DevOps. He had been working for Ford for a number of years. And one of the consultancies we work with saw his profile, and they were the only people that actually requested him, because everyone saw mechanical engineer and thought, no, they're not going to be right for our DevOps roles. So he went through, did their tech test. He'd been learning in his own time, and he absolutely smashed the tech test out of the park. And he's now a senior DevOps engineer at that organization 18 months later. So give people a chance to do stuff. But I think that from a how would you evaluate, it probably depends on the level you're doing it. So at junior level, there's much more candidates out there. In intermediate level, again, more candidates out there. So you probably can do more tech tests. When you get to that senior level, one tech test become less relevant, because a lot of tech tests are algorithmic, very mathematical based, i.e. what you're doing at college. And also there are less of them out there. So classic economics, supply and demand. If the equilibrium isn't there, then it means that you're not going to be able to get the candidates. So I think it really depends on the level how you want to evaluate candidates. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that tech recruiter teams are making in this market? That's a really interesting question. I'll go first. So I think that one of the things that I always push with clients, and one of the best things I've seen with a client over a year is there's a company we worked with basically since I joined hackajob, and they have empowered their recruitment team to make decisions on candidates. So essentially, when a candidate goes into process, they make a decision whether they want to take this candidate forward, the recruitment team, not the hiring managers, and they'll book straight into the hiring manager's diary. I've met with their head of talent a number of times over the years, and always asked them the question, how is that going for you now? As they scale out more and more, because they've gone from, I think they're about 100 people when we started working with them, and they're just over 3,000 now. And every time I walk up to him, I say, look, how are you doing with this now? Is it changing as you scale more? And they are so bought into this process that it means that they can get candidates through process very, very quickly. And it's meant that they've been able to scale at a big level. And they've only got a recruitment team of 3 people, but they've gone from 100 to 3,000 in 5 years. I think that companies not empowering their recruiters is a big mistake. I also think that, as we've touched on with the seniority, focusing too much on years of experience is a mistake as well. And I also think that not looking at coding boot camps, as I touched on yesterday, is another big mistake that people make, because if you look at coding boot camps, they tend to be where a lot of the diverse talent is. And every company is pushing on diversity at the moment. But if you're only looking at people that have got a college degree, for whatever reason, you're not looking at what have they done with that experience, then I think that's a big mistake as well. Nikki, have you got any that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add there is just not looking at candidates that have transferable skills that could quite quickly ramp up and be right for the role. Let's say you're looking for a Angular developer. Well, actually, you can probably find a React developer much quicker who can come on board and be ramped up and trained. And I think it's about advising the hiring community in your business about that, and try to get some negotiables around that job description not being so rigid based on a set of skills.
Yeah, and the other thing I would empower everyone on this call to do is know your data. So know your funnel data, because I think it's very good. It's very easy for hiring managers to look at what you're doing in your day-to-day and say, why have we not made hires in the team? But I think it's always important to look at your funnel. Like, where are people dropping out? Is it because you brought 30 people into the funnel for your Java developer roles in the last 3 weeks, and 24 of them have dropped out because they've accepted new roles? That's data we carry on hackajob. So it's something that we always empower our clients to be looking at. So understand your funnel, because it will allow you to make the right decisions on what you want to do. We haven't got any more questions in the Q&A at the moment, so we'll give it a minute or so, just to see if there's any more that come in. It's classic recruiter, isn't it? You're looking at it and going, who is going to speak first? And I gave up there.
I can actually, my puppy's just started to cry, so I'm quite happy that I brought her out of the room before we started this.
There's one final question that I realized that I hadn't answered. Do you think that TypeScript is a common requirement for developers at the moment? I think it's becoming more common than it probably was before. And I think the reason for that is that JavaScript, because it's written in JavaScript, it's basically a more complex version of JavaScript, and I think it's very usable for engineers. So we're seeing it more commonly than ever before. I think that often what holds it back is that the native, if you like, framework for TypeScript would be Angular rather than React, and you can absolutely use React from a framework perspective on TypeScript. It's just not native to TypeScript, so I think that holds it back in some regards. But I think TypeScript is much more important if you are looking for purely front-end developers. If you're looking at full stack developers, generally you'd be looking at someone that knows TypeScript or JavaScript, whereas on the front end, typically over time we're seeing companies push towards TypeScript as their main language for their front end teams.
Yeah, I would also say that I do tend to find that when a company is looking for somebody with TypeScript, they're predominantly quite open to somebody with JavaScript experience who is open to making that transition.
Cool. Fine. Cool. I'm going to take the messages being the Q&A being empty, as we've run out of questions at the moment, which is absolutely fine. If any go in while I'm doing my spiel at the end, we can absolutely answer them. But I guess as an ending point, hopefully anyone that was here on Monday would have heard this, but essentially we're offering a wine tasting, which will be given to anyone that attends all of the sessions. So if you've joined the first couple, feel free to join the rest of them. The next couple of days we'll be going through DevOps tomorrow, and then on Friday we'll be doing data. Nikki, I know you're on data, so correct me if Friday isn't the day we're doing data. And then on Monday we'll be going through emerging tech. Emerging tech will be covering stuff like Golang, Kotlin, Clojure. We'll also be going through technical testing and mobile. So we touch on a lot of the stuff that we mentioned today from a TDD, BDD perspective. No more questions, which is fine. I expected the front end probably was going to be one of the smaller topics we covered this week, but I wanted to put in an hour just in case there were lots of questions. Nikki, thank you very much for attending. I'm looking forward to having you on again on Friday. For everyone that's attended today, thank you so much for attending. As we did yesterday, if you've got any questions, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I had a number of people connect with me on LinkedIn last night. Love connecting with people. If you've got any questions or you want anything answered, let me know. We will be downloading and sending out all of these presentations over the next few days. As I'll touch on as we went through this, when you see it, it should have spaces between some of the words. I don't know why Zoom has changed it. When I'm in preview mode, it's pushing some of the words together, but we'll be sending it out from a marketing perspective over the next couple of days, every presentation. So if you haven't received it, reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me on email at Darren at hackajob.co, and we can get across to you. But everyone have a lovely day, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks for joining.